Hello, my name is Jordan Schachter. I'm a speech-language pathologist. I'm going to talk to you today about my somewhat unique approach to treatment of dementia, as well as language disorders that come following a stroke. The typical treatments that are done have to do with trials to try to remember the name for objects, like cup. And it's a losing battle in a sense because if the disease is progressive, you're going to lose that information anyway. Also, it begins to build an association that you have a problem and that you begin to struggle with that problem, which is going to be, as I said, a losing battle. And the further issue, if you look at the neurology, Wernicke's area is located way back there. It's not in the front where we're doing the planning and predicting. It's located at the juncture between the parietal and temporal lobes. The parietal lobe is where we have the sensations, and the temporal lobe is associated with our interpretation of sound. And so the treatments that I recommend are much more aligned with the realm of mindfulness and equanimity, being accepting of events that are occurring, because we're trying to remove energy from the frontal lobe where there's planning and predicting. What happens when you have Alzheimer's disease and in many strokes, your planning and predicting are intact, but you can't call upon the memories that you had before, the names of things or what you were doing or where you are, maybe who you are. And so you have this very active attempt to predict and plan, and it's stealing, in a sense, the energy up here, which is causing anxiety. If you look at the different types of dementia that occur, there's a rarer form, not as common as Alzheimer's, called frontotemporal. Now, with frontotemporal dementia, there is a 20% more likely chance that a person will be in a state of peace or elation. This is, in theory, because they are no longer planning and predicting. And if you look at spiritual teaching, it is along the same lines. If you're present in the moment, you're not feeling agitation. You're at peace in the moment. And so that is the work. When someone is entering a state of dementia or is at risk for a state of dementia, if you cultivate that presence, and particularly auditory presence, then you're beefing up or you're strengthening, you're giving power to and attention to the parietal and temporal lobes. And this is extremely important because what happens is as those lobes lose power, or if they already have lost power, the planning and the predicting, the frontal temporal lobe, is going to begin to suck energy away, which just creates the agitation. I go through in my longer presentation all the different types of treatments that there are, right? And there's a finite amount of energy. So where the energy is going is going to make a difference. And so the other treatments, if they're not increasing the power and the attention and the importance of the auditory experience and the sensory experience, then they are robbing those areas of their power, right? We give these brain areas power based on what we're thinking about, what we're doing. Now, Wernicke's area is where language is understood, is perceived. People talk about the Broca's area, but that's just the manifestation, the carrying out of the motor plan of what it is we're saying. In terms of comprehension, it's really Wernicke's area. And so if we bring our attention to, when we practice this, bring our attention to the parietal zone, to our senses, then we're paying attention to what's happening and we're taking that information in. What we're talking about here is giving the parietal lobe more attention and energy. There are many treatments, and I'm not saying don't do these treatments. I'm just saying that I don't do these treatments, and I will augment the treatments that other speech pathologists will do. And the reason I don't give these treatments, for example, cognitive stimulation, extremely popular. In a study of 718 subjects, half control, half were given this cognitive stimulation, which is like puzzles and asking them questions about their lives. You find that there's no evidence that there's any improvement in the mood of the people, the ability to care for themselves, and no reduction in the behavior that's found to be difficult by staff and caregivers. So ultimately, it's just stalling what's inevitable, that you're going to lose the names of these objects. Instead, what my work is to get you at peace with the loss of that information, and so that you can maintain a joy of life in your remaining years. Now, space retrieval therapy also is similar, where you just give a little bit more and more time before the person gets the prompt as to what your name is or what their name is, or naming some object. But again, the studies show, if you look at the studies, there's no change in the neuropsychological performance. So the behaviors stay the same. The best way to explain my approach, and again, when I do the longer presentation, I can go into a lot more detail, but the best way to explain it is, imagine you're sailing a ship and you see a giant wave coming at you. That wave is dementia, right? That wave is the inevitable, right? Now, if you try to turn away from it in this some vain attempt to keep your boat going, you're going to get hit from the side and you're going to fall over and you're going to lose your crew. But if you point into the wave, then you're offering less resistance. The bow of your boat crests over the wave. So we're saying, I'm not going to resist this event. I'm going to dive into it. The other way I describe this is, you're the pilot of a plane and you're running out of gas and you see a desert island and you have to land on that island. And you don't know anything about what that island is. You have no idea. Just as we have no idea what the experience of dementia is unless we go in with some preconception of what it is. And we have no idea what death is unless we go into some preconception of what it is. And the same thing with stroke. So what I'm saying is, how you land that plane, how you dive into that wave will impact your experience of the event. And I'm saying, if you offer no resistance, no judging, no seeking control, no planning and predicting, then you can enter a sensory experience of what is actually happening right now. And do I have peace with it? Can I make peace with that? That is the work that I do with patients. There's this game called headbands, and you have this card on your head. And with my patients, I have a group of people together, and they're trying to figure out what is the card on their head. And it's fun. We're still working on language, but it's not about can you name it. It's can you have equanimity when you cannot name it. Do you have peace when you cannot name it? Because that, in my opinion, is the true work. This is a famous tennis player from the past, Jimmy Connors, and he won a lot of matches, but he was always arguing with the umpire. He was not a happy guy, at least not on the court. And so what we're saying is, it's not about winning. It's about losing gracefully. It's about failing gracefully. It's about flowing with life, whatever life is presenting us with. And if you have dementia, if you have a stroke, if you're facing death, those things are not as easy to flow with. So you're in the big leagues now. You are given the opportunity to demonstrate for the rest of us how one can gracefully enter that. And we see people all the time, especially spiritual teachers of an advanced level of consciousness. When they enter dementia, they do not have agitation. They're at peace. And so that is what I think we should be focusing on. Instead of, we've got over 20 years of research on pharmaceuticals and tons of speech pathologists giving drills and drills and trials and trials. It's futile. Maybe someday something will happen there. But what I'm saying is, in the right now, let us focus on acceptance. So when memory fails, we practice equanimity. We make peace each time. The trials are about making peace, not remembering the name of the thing. And so then equanimity is the goal more than a successful memory. There's a quote from Sanskrit, which can be very challenging to individuals who are facing a dementia or a stroke or facing death due to a terminal illness. And here I'm just going to read it to you, and then we'll take it apart. So they say there is no self-purifying process equal to attaining peace of mind, and no bliss equal to being satisfied over one's lot. So let's take that one apart for a second. No bliss equal to being satisfied over one's lot. Well, if you have dementia, or if you're facing the end of life, and the medical community is telling you that your lot is not good, and all attempts to combat it feel like sand slipping through your fingers, and you have this saying, we need to recontextualize what's happening. And so I go into this more deeply in my workshops and my one-on-one sessions with clients, but the idea basically is, how do you build equanimity with what is happening? That is more important, because we do not have a cure for dementia. So the second part that I want to dive into is It says there's no disease bigger than excessive desire or craving any worldly thing. Now, for someone who is facing dementia or the end of life or a stroke, it really seems like your disease is the biggest thing. And here's this ancient quote from Sanskrit saying that something that most people have, a desire for what they don't have, is bigger. And so it's very easy to say, well, they don't know what they're talking about. But what if they do? What if what is essence of the dementia or the essence of the stroke or the essence of having a terminal illness is not the illness itself, but is your response or your attitude, which is totally understandable, but a desire for it to not be is the source of the suffering. Let me hand this over to Thich Nhat Hanh, who could say it a lot better than me in one sentence. It is not impermanence that makes us suffer. What makes us suffer is wanting things to be permanent when they are not. So with the law of impermanence, everything changes. If we don't want it to change, or we want it to change faster, or we want it to change back to the way it was, then we have suffering. But if we're in the flow, in the moment, again, the parietal lobe, and through auditory, the temporal lobe, then we're right here, right now. There's no story going on, right? The story, which there's a lot of reasons to say, yes, the dementia, the stroke, the terminal illness is the worst disease ever. But that story does not empower you, does not give you anywhere to go, anywhere positive to go, right? It's like the island. We don't know what's on the island. It's like the wave, the least amount of resistance. We do not resist what is happening. We come into this moment. What are we feeling in this moment? Now, this is going to sound like spirituality to people, but I'm speaking neurologically speaking. You're just moving away from the frontal lobe, which the studies show is more likely to cause you the stress from planning and predicting. Those individuals, in my opinion, who have a stroke or dementia and aren't in or on their deathbed and are not having planning or predicting, but they have acceptance, we see it all the time. They're in a state of peace. That should be the goal above all the other goals. I'm not saying don't work on the other goals, but that is the goal that my heart is inspired to work on with people.